This week on the Nonprofit News Feed, of course, brought to you by Whole Whale. My name is George Weiner, Chief Whaler of Whole Whale, and we have Nick Azoulay, digital strategist at Whole Whale, back from his break. We thanked Leo. Leo did a great job standing in, and now you are back just in time for the chaos of what the current administration is doing specifically in and around the nonprofit sector. I think you'd have to be living perhaps under a rock. Might be a nice place to be right now. However, if you had not heard about certainly the federal funding freeze, Nick, why don't you take us into some of the top line items that are more disproportionately impacting nonprofits with regard to the administration shifts right now?
Yeah, George, exactly. We want to start us off by talking about what everybody's talking about, and that is that Trump administration executive orders have left NGOs and foundations and universities and pretty much any entity that relies on federal funding deeply, deeply concerned. George, we can talk about the very broad freeze on federal spending. That's kind of the big ticket item over the past 24 hours. That has been paused, that has been blocked by a federal judge. So we kind of live to fight another week on that front. And I'm sure we'll talk more about it next week, rather. But at the onset, we want to talk at the top about two executive orders that, while they may face legal challenges, are probably within the purview of the executive. So whether or not the federal funding freeze gets rescinded, these might very well stay. And that's two executive orders on diversity and immigration. So the Trump administration last week passed a wide sweeping executive order on DEI that is going to deeply and already shaping deeply how nonprofits, universities, foundations, NGOs, et cetera, talk about diversity on their website, how they represent diversity programming, and the ramifications of this are deep. And the executive order itself specifically calls out publicly traded corporations, large nonprofit corporations or associations, and foundations with assets of $500 million or more to be investigated if they are found to still be promoting DEI. So, George, it looks like the administration's really weaponizing the executive against any entity receiving federal funding that seems to promote DEI, right? And even though it looks like the investigations might focus at the top, this has a chilling effect on the whole sector, right? So many entities touch federal funding, receive federal grants, and are, quite frankly, going to have to self-censor or risk receiving the ire of an administration hell-bent on eliminating DEI from all federal programs and all federal funding projects.
I have been trying to think about, how nonprofits are like practically responding right now, and we're still in a reactive mode. It's hard to play forward-looking strategy when you are dealt such an aggressive suite of sort of everything that goes against maybe what you have been working toward and on. I want to get very practical, though. On the language front, it seems clear that there is a culture of fear, but also a review of content, a review of your website content, a review of your social content, any commentary that is anti this new ideological authoritarian view that diversity is bad, that you didn't mention it, but it's also included there, anything in and around transgender communication support programming. So unfortunately, here is the sad but true recommendation. Like, we are an organization, Whole Whale. We created a tool literally called the inclusivity tool that was designed to crawl and help websites figure out where they had non-inclusive language with a database of over 1,000 different terms and words that could be rephrased. And the irony is not lost on me that the pendulum has swung so far in the other direction that same tool now is technically and can be used to now identify the same words on your site to get rid of them, i.e. DEI, transgender, things talking about equity and inclusion, all of these horrible, horrible words, according to the administration. And, that sad irony is, not lost on me. But I think as you're going through it, there are some tough conversations in great organizations that have been doing this work. And here's the truth. The work of social justice, the work of diversity in organizations existed before this acronym. It did, long before. I think part of this acronym got caught up in more of maybe a religious fervor that was able to be attacked and misused and profited from in different ways. And when it became this more of a religious concept as opposed to just a practical caring for the other humans in our society, it became this lightning rod. And here's the truth. Words aside, the work will continue. Your work for bringing in diversity to your organization, to serving each other with a mindset of equity and how we meet people where they are, and the opportunities that all of us deserve, is not going to change. Change the words. Don't marry them. A rose by any other is still a freaking rose. So sure, I think you just do it dispassionately and just get it done. But I think honestly, the truth is, if you are a large organization over $500 million, you have got to do a very quick job, unfortunately, of amending language that will offend and harm the work that you need to be doing in communities. And that may feel like rolling over. Maybe that's like, oh, how dare they? Like, I'm here to play the game we need to support the people we need to, and acknowledge that words matter. However, in this case, the words are not the work. It is not the same. It is not synonymous. Because you remove a DEI statement doesn't mean you don't care about it. In the same way that you cared before you put the DEI statement on the site, and you'll care after. So I think it is a hard place to be, but I think I have a lot of empathy for the folks that make and need to make that decision. And I hope other people do, as opposed to what I hope is not the case, creating lists of people that we feel like betrayed. Look at a list of people. Like, anytime you find yourself making a list, you got to look in that mirror. You got to say, like, nothing good is coming from a list of people that I'm going to like find for retribution in the future.
Yeah, George, that's a great point. And unfortunately, I think that's happening within the federal workforce, right?
Well,
They've kind of created this like social totalitarian structure, you know. Unfortunately, I think I heard this morning that transgender, they might ban transgender troops from serving in the military. Like, the cruelty is the point. It doesn't make the US safer or anything, really. But one side note on that, I read the executive order. It also explicitly mentioned the words misinformation. Apparently that's a language non-grata.
Misinformation and disinformation.
So
we're going to need a new word for, how about goddamn lies?
Oh man, what a crazy time to be alive. George, the other executive order we wanted to talk about just briefly was a pretty wide sweeping executive order as well on immigration, particularly as it pertains to how federal agencies interact with migrants and refugees, in a new directive, a policy that protected non-documented folks from being apprehended in schools and churches was rescinded. In theory, allowing ICE agents and federal law enforcement to enter into schools, churches, community centers, places that were otherwise seen as kind of off limits because they provide vital and essential human services, which are human rights in some way. Unfortunately, it seems like this has had a chilling effect on some students and families who are taking their kids out of school. We've seen an increase in ICE raids across the country. George, right across the river near my hometown, there was an ICE raid in Newark, New Jersey, in which ICE entered into a business, detained everyone inside of that without a warrant, and in that dragnet ended up accidentally or inadvertently arresting American citizens, including US veterans. It seems that the gloves are kind of off when it comes to apprehension, and the vast network of organizations and charities that support immigrants are being vilified by the administration. Notably and kind of strangely, Catholic Charities provides a vast network of support to immigrants. It was directly criticized by J.D. Vance over the weekend. So it seems that the news on that front is a little bit alarming, but of course we'll kind of continue to see how this develops.
Yeah, not much to add there, but there's going to be an unfortunate domino effect, removing safe spaces from these hubs of community support. for folks, and it's just in general not safe, regardless of your status, to have like ICE raiders come into your school or community. Is a culture of fear for everyone involved, and there are second order effects of that that are hard to calculate, especially when you're talking about schools.
Yeah, George, absolutely. Before we finish this section, I just want to call out that we were talking about how to frame this, right? We didn't want to make it doom and gloom. And if you're looking for a ray of hope in all of this, that is the incredible work of nonprofit foundations and associations like the Council of Nonprofits. They were among the groups that filed lawsuits yesterday that helped block this freeze on federal funding. So if you're a nonprofit, now's the time to start engaging with all those associations, because they are what's standing up for the sector right now. They are doing the Lord's work. And just want to kind of highlight the incredible and resilient advocacy work that many of those groups and attorneys are doing on behalf of the sector, and already netting wins in challenging some of these far overreaching and potentially illegal executive actions.
Yeah, they have forms right now for anyone who is dealing with federal funding issues, so they can collect and analyze what is actually happening on the ground, recommending that organizations talk with their government representatives to find information and specifics. Really respect, as you mentioned, the speed and quality that they have responded to this emergency.
Yeah, absolutely, George. All right, George, let's take us into the fun part of the podcast.
Hey, more fun. Just cut that first part. Okay, just cut.
We'll cut that first part. As reported by the New York Times and pretty much everybody, George, there's a new player on the AI block. DeepSeek, a Chinese AI startup backed by a hedge fund, has unleashed a new chatbot in an open source AI model that is already rivaling the quality of output of some of the major American models, such as those developed by OpenAI. What's crazy is they're doing it at a fraction of the cost. And these models are also totally open source. If you wanted to, you could run them locally on your machine. So this company's unconventional approach, I think, is partly because they're trying to kind of circumvent the typical way in which Chinese companies are overseen by Beijing. But George, this new tech, pretty much this week, entering at least into the public consciousness, already destabilizing tech markets, already upending major announcements about AI and chip innovation in America. George, what's your take on this? You also did a really cool kind of primer and explainer video with one of your famous metaphors. What are you thinking about here?
I was excited to see the innovation, and sort of nationalist interest aside, I think the fact that they chose to open source this model is a real shot across the bow, and also fantastic for the nonprofit industry because it is helping democratize access to the best possible models and is reinforcing the commoditizing phase of AI, where it's now becoming, in my metaphor, like a slightly better hammer. And a slightly better hammer. At a certain point, you have a hammer. It's there, and I get it. And yes, you could make it shinier, you can make it prettier, but we're reaching this sort of intelligence asymptote, which actually is like a little bit of a relief for now on how it's being used. So now the question is, what is the training in your team? What is the implementation? At a high level, yes, it's going to destabilize Silicon Valley and billionaires that have made an investment in this assumption that it's simply more and more GPUs and more data to get better and better results. It seems as though there's a diminishing return to that, and more it's about how you are putting the ingredients together to make a better cake, as opposed to we need more ingredients to make a better cake, to oversimplify it. This model is really fun to play with, but in the commoditization game, it's no longer the sort of how it's scaling on, how it's ranking on like reasoning and intelligence. Like these things are all pretty darn intelligent now within this band. It's about price and speed for me. So I have rolled out DeepSeek on a number of chats on CauseWriter just to play with it. I think the latency is a big question for me. The other thing is there are sort of known censorship and biases, and there are unknown censorship and biases. I don't know what I don't know, but I do know that if you are writing a paper on Tiananmen Square, I wouldn't use DeepSeek. Okay? Just, it ain't going to help you. But every model that I've encountered has these sort of third rails that have been sort of overwritten. Don't talk about this. Don't mention that. Oh, that's too political. And so, again, I don't know what I don't know about DeepSeek in terms of where it is, in terms of its biases, but that definitely matters, which is why I continue to be a long-term optimist around using multiple models to create the best possible tool. Because there's going to be another one. Like, hold your breath. It's going to come out in the coming weeks that so-and-so has another model and so-and-so has another model, and they're in this race. And it's being more and more commoditized. So pay attention to, as you are looking to adopt the latest and greatest, that you're dealing with a better hammer. That's fine. But at a certain point, you got a hammer. And it's more about how your team knows how to use it without slamming their fingers. There's roughly 30,000 injuries hammer-related in the US a year because people don't know how to use that tool. And in the same way, improper use of AI can absolutely hurt an organization's credibility, reputation, stakeholders that rely on information output from it. So there's the sort of hot take, but I was actually more on the side of excitement because I am all about finding the best possible models for the best possible speed and price for organizations. And I was like, cool, let's play. It's fantastic. I will say one more other thing is the don't use deepseek.com. The application, like straight up just don't use it. You are wholesale giving your data. Like the privacy page might as well say, yeah, you know exactly what we're doing with your data. They could have just summarized it with that. There's no part of it that protects anything. They are everything you put there. Looking at it takes your information. Literally making eye contact. Every time you say DeepSeek, you have given it is the funniest privacy policy I have ever read. And honestly, you know what I like? It's transparent. You know what? They make no bones about it. They're like, every opportunity to say, we are using your shit for making better stuff. We are keeping your data inside of the CCP. Like, that's what is happening here. And I was like, you know what? Thanks for telling us. Instead of this like sort of obfuscated open AIs, like, did you check this box or not? Oh, sorry, it was unchecked. We can use it for training. Like surreptitiously saying on one side, like, nah, there's no checkbox. Everything goes there. That said, because this is a bit of a confusion, right? Like, wait a minute, didn't you just say you moved CauseWriter onto it? Aren't you sending the CCP? No. Open source model means that this, 100 gigabyte file of this model, this like .gguf, this file model can be mounted on a server that I own or that somebody based in the US owns. So in that world, no data are then being sent to this other server, this other main application that the CCP owns. I know this is complicated, but it's uniquely different than OpenAI, where all roads, every query you run with their model will go to Sam Altman. All roads lead to Sam Altman. That is different with open source models. Similar, Meta has a Llama model, right? Their Llama series models. All the data you use does not go to Zuckerberg. It depends on who's hosting that model for those API calls for answering your chat messages back and forth. And there's a lot of people playing by a lot of different rules. I feel like I was way more than you like.
No,
expected.
George, this is.
I'm just trying
to
unpack it.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Facebook doesn't need any more of your data. They got it.
They're good. It doesn't matter. They good.
All right, George, super quick. This one's from the Harvard Gazette. That was kind of cool. Harvard's partnering with a national nonprofit called Westbridge that's connecting high-achieving, low-income students to top colleges, offering full financial aid. Of course, there's a big kind of like regime of scholarships and Pell Grants and all that stuff, but I don't think I've ever seen a program that's kind of neatly as much as nonprofit helps kids, and it's like an official program. So I think this is pretty innovative. And the first class will begin their studies in the fall of 2026 and is really just kind of like a direct pipeline to helping underserved communities access the best of American higher education with an official partnership with the university. And I think this is awesome, and love to see that. We talk a little bit about, of course, there was the major Supreme Court decision on diversity in college applications. Colleges could no longer, make decisions based on diversity parameters, et cetera. But this is, I think, one of those ways that goes back to kind of doing the work, even though the language isn't as explicit.
The other part of this is exciting is that they announced that, I think, for 2026 class, right? So there is a window where other organizations are looking around for what is the new DEI, what is the new way to achieve diversity, which is important. In any world you work in, diversity is important. If you worked in biology and you produced a monoculture of plants, one little blight kills absolutely everything. Diversity is baked into the system. So this is an interesting look at what an elite institution is doing to move this into the next phase. Remember, the words may change, but the work does not. And I think this is kind of curious. If I'm reading this right, is this similar to the way, let's say, athletic departments like football programs, basketball programs go out and like go and recruit in high schools, be like, these players are like pretty good. Let's make an offer. Let's go be proactive about this. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, George, I think it's not entirely dissimilar, right? And I think in a way that college athletes, high school athletes, like high performing D1 athletes are committing to schools before their senior year even. And it gives just kind of a sense of, I don't know what the application timeline looks like, but it gives a sense of stability, I think, to students, and particularly students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, to have that offer and not have to go through the stress of, meeting with financial aid departments and, experimenting with loans and all sorts of that the stress of that is so immense, right? I think that in some ways this gives a little bit of that power back to the students just to focus on their studies, on their schooling, and their personal success.
I'm glad you picked the story out. That's, I think, one of those threads that I want us to continue to watch for. What, as the words change, how does the work continue, and under what new ways? And that might be very exciting actually to see, because in some respects, I think the work of diversity, equity, inclusion programs succeeded, and others, we saw some that were failing. They were, constantly talked about it, saying like, did this really achieve what we wanted to? So the next iteration hopefully learns from mistakes and then comes up with new ways to do the same important work.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, George, I got a feel good for you. This is a fun one from 8 News Now, and it's about an organization called SNORR, SNORR, Southern Nevada Off-Road Recovery, a volunteer rescue nonprofit that provides free search and rescue services across a 400-mile radius, including Mount Charleston and Lake Mead. They handle between 500 and 1,000 recoveries and rescues annually and see increased activity during winter months. And they work with local law enforcement, Metro Police, and other search and rescue organizations. But, as we're talking about nonprofits fulfilling a need, this seems like a pretty efficient use of the nonprofit model, literally doing search and rescue, or maybe your off-road dude buggy, flipped and you need someone to help, turn it back up, right? Or something like a turtle. I don't know, but either way, I think this is awesome. And George, you may not know this, I actually was a National Park Service volunteer for 3 years, 3 summers, and I was not doing search and rescue, but I have an appreciation for helping folks stay safe, enjoying America's great natural wonders. So awesome story here.
Yeah, I worked Adirondack volunteer crew, maintaining trails. You can really get lost out there. So the fact that they're saving like 2-3 people a day is very, very respectable, very needed.
I love it. Is there anyone left in Southern Nevada? I mean, that's
They got
pretty
everyone, I
high.
think.
They-
100%.
oh
Oh
man.
man, we just lost Nevada. Thank you.
Oh
Sorry,
yeah.
all the listeners there.
Oh man. All right, George, it's joke time. By the way, I really appreciate one, I loved the podcast last week. I also really appreciate Leo asking you before the joke, quote, do I have to laugh? And you know what? That made me laugh.
do I have to?
Do I have
No,
to?
no, not paid to laugh. All right. Since I wrote this joke and I'm very proud of it, would you mind if I went with
George,
it?
please, I'd be honored.
Brilliant. So, question: why did the Girl Scouts run out of inventory?
I don't know.
The users accepted all the cookies on their website.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
oh, brother.
It was top of mind because my little girl, a little scout, made her very first cookie sales this past weekend,
Oh.
and the dad joke nonprofit maker in me couldn't let this one go. Accept all cookies.
Man. Accept all cookies. Well, don't always, but if they're from the Girl Scouts, yes.
All right. See you, buddy.
See you, George.